Have you ever found yourself doing things that seem to make no sense and wondered, why did I do that? But it doesn't stop there. Imagine discovering that what you're feeling could actually be a hidden superpower. Anxiety might be the villain behind these actions. I'll share with you 6 unexpected behaviors that anxiety might be causing you to adopt. You'll definitely recognize at least one of them in yourself, and with each revelation, you'll have more questions, and I promise the answers will fascinate you. Ready for this journey? Then let's go. 1. Planning overload. The first odd thing anxiety makes us do is obsessively plan. Have you ever caught yourself making endless lists for everything or incessantly revising your plans, as if that would ward off the uncertainty of the future? Anxiety makes us believe that the more we control, the less room there is for the unexpected. But could it be that this excess of control is actually controlling us? You know, I have a confession to make. Sometimes I find myself creating lists upon lists for everything in my life, from the weekly menu to the most mundane commitments. At first it seems like an organized way to live, right? But I've realized that often, behind this lies anxiety trying to take control. For instance, the other day I was planning a simple weekend trip. Instead of getting excited about the outing, I found myself obsessed with details: the weather, traffic, hotel reservations, activities. Every little aspect had to be perfectly aligned. And then I realized something important. This need to control every detail stemmed from fear. The fear of the unexpected, of what I can't control. Sound familiar? The problem is, in this quest for control, we end up losing the flavor of spontaneity, of those pleasant surprises life has in store for us when we least expect it. Sure, planning is necessary, but when it becomes an obsession, it's as if we're living more in the future, or what we imagine of it, than in the present. So, how to deal with this? One strategy I've been trying is to set limits for planning. I allow myself to plan, but within a defined time. After that, it's time to trust and let go. This isn't easy, especially for an anxious mind like mine. But I've learned that the beauty of life often lies in the unexpected. Speaking of the unexpected, this leads me to another thing anxiety does: procrastinatory avoidance. This one is interesting and in a way even ironic. But let's save the details for the next topic. You'll see how anxiety can make us postpone not only what we fear, but also what we love or need to do. Intriguing, isn't it? 2. Procrastinatory avoidance. Here's the second odd thing: procrastinatory avoidance, a concept that might seem contradictory at first glance. Procrastinating, delaying tasks, who hasn't done it, right? But procrastinatory avoidance adds another layer. It's procrastinating not because you don't want to do something, but because the thought of doing it fills you with anxiety. Anxiety has a peculiar way of convincing us to avoid important tasks, doesn't it? This happens when we postpone tasks, not out of laziness, but because the idea of facing them fills us with anxiety. It could be a work project, an important email, or even a difficult conversation. Procrastination, in this case, is an attempt to temporarily escape anxiety, but in the long run, it only tends to increase. How can we recognize this pattern and start facing our tasks in a healthier way? Let me give you a practical example. I had to send an important email to a client. It seemed simple, but each time I thought about writing it, a wave of what-ifs invaded my mind. What if I say something wrong? What if it's not well received? So, I postponed it, finding other priorities that were less intimidating. Curiously, by delaying, the anxiety didn't decrease. It only increased because deep down I knew I still had to face that task. This behavior is a defense mechanism, an attempt to protect ourselves from emotional discomfort. But like a bubble, the more you stay inside it, the harder it is to get out. The key, I discovered, is to face small doses of this anxiety gradually. I started by replying to simpler emails and gradually increased the challenge until sending that email to the client didn't seem so scary anymore. But anxiety has many faces, and one of them can lead us to an almost obsessive focus on our health, something especially common nowadays, with so much information available at the click of a button. Have you ever caught yourself searching for symptoms on the internet until you convinced yourself that you had some rare disease? I have, and that's a conversation for our next topic. 3. Health hyperfocus. The internet. An incredible tool, but when it comes to health, it can become a minefield for those with anxiety. Have you ever found yourself checking symptoms on the internet for hours, convinced that something is seriously wrong? Anxiety can lead us to develop a hyper-focus on our health, resulting in a behavior known as cyberchondria. Cyberchondria is the tendency to tirelessly search for symptoms online, convincing ourselves that we have every possible disease. This obsession with monitoring and analyzing any sign in our body can not only increase our level of anxiety, but also lead us to believe in illnesses we don't have. It's important to recognize when this care for our health turns into an obsession that harms more than helps. But how can we find a healthy balance between being mindful of our health and not letting fear control our lives? I vividly remember one night when I had a stronger headache than usual. What did I do? Straight to Google. 2 hours later, I was convinced I had a rare condition, when in fact it was just the tension of the day and lack of hydration. This obsessive search for answers on the internet only made my anxiety skyrocket. The problem with health hyperfocus is that it creates a vicious cycle. The more we search, the more anxious we become, and the more symptoms we believe we have, further fueling the anxiety. It's a labyrinth that seems to have no way out. But how to break this cycle? The key lies in seeking reliable sources and, most importantly, knowing when to stop. I've learned to set limits for my search for information on the internet and to seek professional advice when necessary. This has helped me keep my anxiety under control and have a more balanced view of my health. And speaking of balance, anxiety can also throw off our perception of what it means to be productive and efficient, leading us to paralyzing perfectionism. You know that fear of making a mistake that even stops you from starting? Well, let's explore that in the next topic. You'll see how the quest for perfection can actually be a huge barrier. 4. Paralyzing perfectionism. The fourth odd behavior induced by anxiety is paralyzing perfectionism. Have you ever found yourself unable to start or finish a task because you feel it will never be good enough? This type of perfectionism isn't about high quality, but about the deep-seated fear of failing or not meeting expectations. Paralyzing perfectionism is yet another trap anxiety sets for us. It's that feeling that if something can't be done perfectly, then it's not worth starting at all. Sounds noble, doesn't it? Striving for excellence, but in practice, it can be incredibly limiting. It can prevent us from taking risks, trying new things, or even accomplishing daily tasks because anxiety makes us believe that if it's not perfect, it's not worthwhile. And how can we start to accept imperfection as part of the learning and growth process? I'll share something personal. I wanted to start a new project, something I was very excited about. But every time I sat down to plan, anxiety whispered, "What if it's not good enough?" That doubt paralyzed me. I kept revising the plans endlessly, seeking perfection until the project became a source of stress, not joy. Paralyzing perfectionism comes from this fear of failure, of not meeting expectations, whether they're our own or others. But what we often fail to realize is that making mistakes is part of the learning process. Failing doesn't make us failures. It makes us human. To deal with this, I began practicing self-acceptance, recognizing that doing my best is enough, even if the final result isn't perfect. Setting realistic goals and celebrating small achievements along the way also helped mitigate this fear of failure. Speaking of fear, another curious aspect that anxiety influences is how and with whom we choose to socialize. Have you noticed that sometimes anxiety makes us very carefully select our social interactions, as if we're trying to protect ourselves from something? This phenomenon is what I call selective socialization, and it's what we'll talk about in the next topic. You'll see how this attempt at self-protection can, in fact, isolate us more. 5. Selective socialization. The fifth odd thing that anxiety can provoke is selective socialization. Anxiety has a peculiar way of influencing how and with whom we choose to interact. Have you ever felt like you needed to mentally rehearse every word before a social meeting, or choose very carefully with whom you'll interact, limiting yourself to an extremely restricted circle of people? As if you needed to create a mental script for each social interaction, anticipating what you're going to say and how people will react. I have. and it can be way too exhausting. This behavior is an attempt to minimize exposure to potentially anxious situations. Although it might seem like a coping strategy, in the long term, it can isolate us and prevent us from enjoying broader and more enriching relationships. How can we then balance the need for comfort with the desire for deeper and varied connections? There was a period when I closed myself off so much that my list of friends could be counted on the fingers of one hand. Not because I didn't want to meet new people, but because anxiety made me fear their judgment. I imagined scenarios where things went wrong before even trying, which led me to avoid social situations I considered risky. But over time, I realized something important. By limiting myself in this way, I was missing out on the opportunity for rich and diverse experiences. Selective socialization, although it seems like protection against anxiety, actually reinforces isolation and can intensify the feeling of loneliness. What worked for me was starting small, accepting invitations to smaller events where I felt more comfortable. Gradually, I expanded my social circle, learning that not all interactions need to be perfect to be meaningful. Now, speaking of challenges, anxiety puts us in front of another quite peculiar one: endless rumination. You know those moments when you find yourself stuck in a loop of thoughts about something that happened or worries about the future? That's our next topic. We'll explore how the anxious mind can fixate on negative thoughts and what we can do to break this cycle. 6. Endless rumination. Have you ever found yourself trapped in a cycle of negative thoughts about past events or worries about the future, unable to break free from this spiral? Endless rumination. This ability our mind has to keep chewing on the same negative thoughts over and over, as if we were trying to solve a problem that, in reality, only grows bigger the more we think about it. It's like a scratched record, playing the same song of endless worry. This rumination process not only consumes our mental energy, but can also negatively affect our mood and overall well-being. Anxiety makes us believe that if we think hard enough about a problem, we can solve all possible scenarios. But how can we break this cycle and direct our attention to the present, cultivating a more positive perspective? I remember a period when I was worried about a presentation at work. Even after it had happened and had gone well, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that could have gone wrong. What if I'd forgotten to mention something important? What if someone hadn't liked it? Even without any negative feedback, my mind created these scenarios, trapping me in a loop of anxiety and doubt. Rumination is like an old habit that our anxious mind loves to practice, but in reality, it distances us from the solution. Instead of helping us solve problems, it immobilizes us, keeping us tied to past or imaginary concerns. To combat this tendency, I started practicing mindfulness, which is basically the art of living in the present moment. When I catch myself ruminating, I try to bring my attention to the now, focusing on something concrete like my breathing or the sounds around me. This doesn't eliminate the worry, but it helps break the rumination cycle, allowing my mind to rest and gain a new perspective on the situation. And speaking of perspective, it's interesting to observe how, by confronting these odd behaviors that anxiety makes us adopt, we gain not only more control over it, but also over our lives. With each small step to break these cycles, we open space to live more fully and meaningfully. Now, before concluding, I'd like to know, what topic do you think we should explore in the next video? Your suggestions are very important for us to continue this journey of self-discovery and growth together.